Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the opening session of the Indo-American Arts Council's Literary Festival 2025. I'm Preeti Ars, Director of the IAC Literary Festival, and it's really such a pleasure to see all of you here bright and early as we begin a weekend that celebrates the power of story, language, and imagination. At the Indo-American Arts Council, we take great pride in being a champion of the arts, bringing the finest in film, music, dance, and literature to audiences in New York. This past year has been one of our most exciting yet, with sold-out screenings, stunning performances, and now a literary festival that continues to grow in both scale and heart. We are truly honored to open this year's festival with one of the most compelling literary voices writing today, Megha Majumdar. Megha's new novel, A Guardian and a Thief, has been hailed as a modern classic, a finalist for the National Book Award and the Kirkus Prize, and an Oprah's Book Club selection. The New York Times called it wrenching yet full of wisdom, and the Washington Post described it as a perfect novel, 200 pages of tightly honed brilliance. Some of you may remember that Megha was at our literary festival a few years ago with her debut novel, Burning. So welcome back, Megha. It's genuinely such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much, Preeti. And thank you, everybody, for coming and being so warm.
And in conversation with Megha this morning is the remarkable Mitra Kalita, an award-winning journalist, media executive, and founder of Epicenter New York and URL Media, both dedicated to amplifying underrepresented voices and strengthening local journalism. Mitra's leadership roles at CNN Digital, The Washington Post, and Quartz have shaped how we understand media and community in the modern age. Welcome, Mitra. Thank you so much. She just got off the flight from Germany, and she's here with a big smile.
And she's going to Philly immediately.
What?
She's going to Philly immediately.
Oh, gosh. Well,
Okay.
more power to you.
I would not miss, I'm like, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I feel like all of you were lined up here at like 7 a.m. to see this brilliant woman next to me. So I actually moved my flight to do this. So I'm as looking forward to this as all of you.
Thank you. So please join me in welcoming Megha and Mitra to the stage for what promises to be an unforgettable conversation on A Guardian and a Thief, a story of love, morality, and survival that speaks powerfully to our times. Welcome, both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to just test it and make sure we're good.
Yes, is this working?
Excellent.
Cool.
All right.
Thank you so much, Mitra, for moving your flight.
No, I mean, you're amazing. Let's just begin with, I also took some time on the flight to read your work, so I do feel like it was a little bit of cheating because I had to cram that in there. I was reading books on Germany before I got to Germany, and then I wanted to prepare for this. Just to give us a sense of the flow for the next, we have about 45 minutes, and then I know there's a break, and then another talk at 11 a.m. I'm just going to try to get a sense of Megha's background a little bit. I know many of you are intrigued by her as much as her work. And then a little bit about this book, right? And then we'll turn it over to all of you for questions. I'll try to keep about 15 minutes or so for questions, but I'll keep an eye on time, and there is a mic going around that can capture your questions. I just want to say it's a delight to be here. The last time I moderated something for IAAC's Literary Festival, it was in 2014 with a man named Mahmoud Mamdani. And so you're already achieving greatness, but look at what happened to him in the subsequent 11 years since I moderated a discussion with him. So I can only hope for an even brighter future in this situation. Your first book, A Burning, was much heralded, as we just heard. And so I imagine the pressure on a writer to figure out what will I do next is quite great. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that transition from your A Burning to A Guardian and a Thief, and why this book.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Mitra. Thank you, IAAC, for having me back. A Burning came out in 2020, and it was a hard time for books. You know, it was the pandemic and bookstores were closed. I had events like this planned, everything got canceled. I just did Zooms. So in some ways it felt like a quiet publication experience, but I feel very lucky because it did get some attention, and now, you know, when I do events for this book, people often come up and say, I'm here because I loved A Burning. You know, people ask me this question a lot, did I feel pressure? And I would say that it is so hard for any book to get attention. You know, think about how many books are on your radar. It is very hard for books to get attention. So to get any kind of attention for your book, to have readers know this book exists, feels like a gift. It never feels like pressure to me. It feels like encouragement. It feels like an understanding that the questions that matter to me also matter to readers, and the questions of the book are speaking to them. So it feels like a real boost, especially in those quiet years when you are writing a new novel.
Can I just ask if you can all turn off your phones? I'm just hearing some pings here and there, so we would really be very grateful for that. I wanted to dive a little bit of the themes between both works of yours, you know, that really have kind of this connection of moral ambiguity, political corruption, and then social connectedness, right? And I wonder if you can reflect on your own upbringing. You yourself migrated to the US to attend Harvard University, I believe. But just tell us a little bit about your own rearing and sort of through the lens of how you arrived at these themes.
That's a beautiful question. I grew up in Kolkata, and I moved to the US to go to college, like you said. And I think it is impossible to grow up in a place like Kolkata without thinking about morals and fate, because you are so exposed to all different classes. You encounter people who have less than you, people who have more than you. You know, I grew up middle class, and I would go to school on the school bus, and from the window of the bus, I would see kids who were washing dishes by the roadside because they worked at these little roadside eateries. And I understood very early on that not every kid gets to go to school. So there was a very early awareness of the luck that I had been born into, which was denied to other people. And I think being exposed to that kind of reality urges you to think about what is the right way to live. You know, how much power do I have in my life, and what should I do with that power? In what way am I entangled with the people who are outside of my family, the people in my city, the people in my neighborhood? What are my relationships with them? And I think that I became very aware of the relative power that I have and the relative powerlessness that I also have. I'll share a moment from when I was applying for a US visa to go to Harvard. I had worked so hard. I had gained admission to this very competitive school. I had financial aid because there's no way I could have afforded to go to Harvard. And the woman at the consulate at the window, she looked at my papers and she said, "You're getting too much money in financial aid. You can't get this visa." And I had that moment of recognizing that one person can change the course of my life. You can work so hard, and then one person can say no. And one person with the might of the United States behind them. So I think that moment also nourished very much the writing about migration in this book. And one last thing I'll say, just to close this out, is that I think very much about the choices we make. You know, we are always making moral choices. We're always deciding, where am I going to spend my money? Who am I going to support? And I read this magazine article a few years ago about shrimp farming in Southeast Asia and how all the shrimp in the US comes from those farms and the horrific conditions under which the workers there work. And I read that, and now every time I buy shrimp, I think about that, but I continue to buy shrimp. You know, I continue to participate in a system which I don't agree with because part of me thinks, oh, what can I do? I'm just one person. Part of me thinks, well, it's more important to me to have a comfortable and nourishing and delicious dinner than to think about the fate of this person who is very far away. And we are all making moral calculations like that all the time. So the beautiful thing about a novel is that you can take those moral calculations to the extreme.
Yeah, I think your work is brilliant because it explores these collisions, right? And I think many of us see ourselves exactly in the manner that you just said. I just want to talk a little bit about the role of Eastern India and Bengal in your work. And this might be framed by my own roots in the region. I'm from Northeast India, Assam. And there is something that's very familiar, and I feel like we've been seeing this in diaspora art. You know, I don't know how many of you saw Misha Chaudhary's Public Obscenities, for example. Did you see?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so that set comes alive where you're like, I'm definitely in Eastern India. You know, there's no question. I feel very similarly about your work. And again, I'm not, obviously Bengal looms large, just for visa alone, it is like the place that my entire family has had to go through, and some of your narration of that situation is familiar. Did you find that, you know, I don't know if you consumed South Asian literature as you were growing up, did you find that lacking? Did you feel kind of an imperative to represent, you know, the East in a way that isn't always kind of in the mainstream of diaspora arts and culture, in the US at least?
You're right. I think Bangla and Bengali culture is very underrepresented, underknown. By the way, the play that you mentioned, it's called Public Obscenities. It's by Misha Chaudhary. I think it's already done, right?
It's done.
Yeah,
It's done. But he had another. I mean, just follow him. He's brilliant. Yeah,
Yes, Misha Chaudhary.
Yeah.
He does theater.
He has another show up right now.
Yes.
Yeah. He's very prolific.
Very good. And that play started with ads. You know, ads that you would see on TV in Kolkata, and I thought that was so beautiful. In writing this book, I was very much writing to. You know, one thing I'll say is that there is a mix, right? On the one hand, yes, representation. On the other hand, I can only tell my story. And I hope that there are thousands and thousands of voices putting together stories of Bengal, of East India, which are very different from the story that I am able to tell or that I am interested in telling. I always write to a reader who I imagine is this heightened version of me. So, you know, a more discerning, more ruthless me. So I'm always thinking about what feels true to me. For example, one element of this book, which has its, you know, I think it's a book which has serious questions, but I think it also has humor in it. There are people in it who make jokes, and that felt like one very important thing to bring into the book, because growing up in Kolkata, I just noticed that everybody around me was so funny. People are very funny.
Unintentionally or not. That's my experience.
They are
yes.
always making jokes, and and they're always dealing with things in such a humorous way. Like imagine when you go to the corner shop and the uncle says, "I don't have change, I'll give you candy." And you're just like, what? So stuff like that, which I think is so essentially funny. It comes from a place of humor and optimism and positivity. And people deal with problems all the time. Like this solution of giving you candy instead of change is because there was a coin shortage. So that I find so amazing and so human and something that I deeply, deeply respect. And I wanted to bring that texture into the book.
So I want to stay with this as we transition to talk a little bit more about the book in terms of what your research process was like, because beautifully you shift from point of view. You did this in the first book and the second. For characters that are clearly different, gender, class, profession. I mean, so did you observe this growing up? Were you the type of child who asked a lot of questions? There's a hijra in your first book, for example. That's a world that you kind of made come alive. So is that something that you keenly observed as you were growing up and then said, I'm going to intentionally research this? Or tell us a little bit about that.
I would say for any fiction writer who is interested in this mode of research, ethnographies are fantastic. I don't know how many people read. Do you know what ethnographies are?
Why don't you define that? Because this comes up in your background a lot. Yeah.
Yes. So ethnographies are books of anthropology where an anthropologist goes to do field work and they spend a lot of time being within a certain community or a place, and then they write about it. So an ethnography results from this kind of deep journalism, I would say, deep long-term journalism, where you are really trying to understand other people's perspectives. You are trying to understand other people in the fullness of who they are. And you are also admitting to yourself that there is really no way in which you can fully understand another person. That border of I seek to understand you and I acknowledge that I cannot fully understand you. I think that is a place of such humility. And it's a place of humility which is great for a fiction writer because that's what you're trying to do. In my books, I'm trying to conjure these other people, and I'm trying to say these are the limits of how deeply I can understand them.
Yeah, that's quite remarkable because I feel, correct me if I'm wrong, but your second book has even more points of view, right? The first had 3. This one, is it more, what's the framing, like omniscient narrator?
There are definitely many more characters. We go closer to them. So this book, A Guardian and a Thief, it follows 2 families. One family is pretty well-to-do family in Kolkata. They have a nice big house. They are getting ready to emigrate and go to Michigan. And they have one last week that they have to survive in Kolkata. And this is a near future Kolkata where the city is devastated by the effects of climate change. There is a food shortage. I think everybody in this room cares about food, so we can talk about that later. There's a food shortage, and in this situation, this family is trying to survive 7 days. And the other family that the book follows, they are a family in a village outside Kolkata, and they are trying to find a foothold in the city. And there are so many minor characters. There's somebody who paints, there's somebody who plays the flute, there's somebody who irons clothes for a living. And the book tries to go close to all of these people.
I was going to ask, you summarized that beautifully, the climate fiction explosion, if you will, or climate art. And this book would be such an example, and yet it also feels like it could be an impending war or some other catastrophe, right? So there's something quite familiar about the narration, which I think is also telling when we think about futuristic novels. It's no longer so far off, right? It felt very palpable. Talk a little bit about that decision making, and also climate as, is this a genre that you're trying to enter, or was that kind of more accidental?
I really came to this subject because of the future of Kolkata. Kolkata is one of the places in the world which is most severely affected by climate change. It has grown hotter over the past several decades, and it is predicted to endure more storms, endure more severe storms, and imagine reading that about your hometown. It's really a moment of grief. It's a moment of thinking about, well, what will happen to all of these places that I love? I am here, but most of my family is still in Kolkata. And so that's how I started thinking about, well, what will it mean to live through climate crisis? What is the lived texture of this? And those of you who are from Kolkata, you already know that there have already been very hot days. I have memories of going out and my shoes sticking to the melting tar of the road because it's so hot. And from there I conjured a future where we might need cooling garments, especially imagine the people who are working outside all day, people who are doing, let's say, food delivery. They might agitate for the right to shade from the sun. So I thought about these aspects, and one really fascinating thing about writing a novel is you realize that you can build this world, build these details, but as a reader, you don't feel anything for details. You feel for people. So I had to build this world and then kind of suppress it within the world of the book so that the people could really shine. And one last thing I'll say about climate fiction is that I think it's a useful label. It lets a reader know this is part of what the book is interested in. But all climate fiction is about the effects of climate change on us. So all climate fiction is the fiction of love. All climate fiction is the fiction of family and friendship and parenthood.
And I also think the kind of political corruption and capitalistic drive kind of bring you to this place. And so there was also something quite logical about the way this comes together. What I also appreciate is that you use, platforms like Facebook and Uber so seamlessly, right? There's a lot of fiction that kind of treats parts of our day-to-day as completely non-existent. And so there was just something about that felt like, oh, this is bringing us to this place, and is futuristic but also quite familiar.
Yeah, you mean the rickshaw driver who calls himself a discount Uber?
Correct, yeah. Sort of this idea of our frameworks being, exactly that. You mentioned love. I want you to talk, as we sort of dive deeper into the book, the idea in this book that love drives actions, and you mentioned one person can have such an influence on the course of your life. Could you talk about your approach to depicting how love can shape and sometimes distort moral choices? I also felt like the interactions among folks and the characters and what was driving them, and also just the actions of love between a parent and child were also, again, I use the word palpable with your work. But how do you see that world? How did you paint that world?
in some ways, I really see this book as being about the experience of being a parent in climate crisis. And I was trying to write a book which had a completely different plot. It was still set in Kolkata, still had the food shortage, but it had a totally different plot, and I couldn't make it work. And then I had my older son, who was now 4 years old, and that experience of becoming a mother and feeling that kind of astonishing love that you feel for your child, it helped me think about, well, what can this love force you to do? So the question of the book really became, what do you do when your love for your children threatens to destroy your moral self? What do you do when your love and your principles clash? And I'm so interested in that question because I think that we tend to see things like love and hope as very simple and very noble, straightforward sentiments. But I think that's really neglecting the muscularity and intricacy of these sentiments. Think about the ways in which your love for somebody can push you to do something which is vicious or harmful to somebody else. Imagine a situation where you haven't had fresh fruit in a very long time, and you see a child who's holding an orange. Are you going to take that orange to feed your own child? You understand it's wrong. There's nothing in you that says, oh, I'm going to do this without any thought. You understand that this is breaking something that you have so far believed is an essential part of you. But will you still do it? And then how does that change your understanding of the capacity your love holds?
Beautiful answer. I'm going to turn it over to all of you in about a few minutes. I want to ask you about America as a character, which really feels intentional, but I want to ask, was that intentional? Giving this place such a strong presence in A Guardian and a Thief. And how did your own experience, both of migration, but now of having lived in this country for quite some time, shape the rendering of the space, the setting, the ambition of America, the idea of America?
I think about this a lot. I moved here at 19 and I'm now 38, so I have lived half my life here and half my life in Kolkata. I wanted to show in this book how America is a place of escape, but it is also a very troubled place. It is a deeply troubled place. And I wanted to show how the people who are in Kolkata see America as this place of freedom and safety, a place where they will have food on the table again. And then there's a part in the book where we go around to a character who is already in Michigan. And through this character's eyes, hopefully we see a little bit of how he perceives that this is not a peaceful place. Climate change is going to affect lands and regions here as well. It's going to affect social relations here as well. And so the different characters have different perspectives on what America is, depending on how far they are from it and how acquainted they are with the current of history and politics that runs underneath everyday life. And this is actually, I've been meaning to ask you this whole conversation, and I feel like this is a good opening to turn it back to you for a second, because you have written about migration, and in some ways I should be interviewing her. You have written about migration. You are so familiar with the deep work of journalism. how do you think about the future and climate change and migration now?
I'll give a very brief answer because this in no way was intended to be turned around like this. It's actually fresh in my mind though because I was in Germany at the course. Everyone in the US is obsessed with bringing the right people to America right now. And Germany is obsessed with bringing the right people to Germany. And if we just sort of distill people's humanity to their productivity, what does that do to our institutions? And so I was a little bit dismayed that it's considered liberal now or progressive to say, well, we'll be policing our migration through the lens of just workforce. Like, you have the right to be here. And you know, as I was reading the words on the plane ride home, I just kept thinking about the value we are placing on humans that is your productivity and your value to this economy, when what is looming is so much more existential. It is literally a threat to all of us. And you know, unlike the US, so I was with a group of delegates who are part of journalism, private sector, and a lot of elected officials, which, you know, is ironic, as we just talked about Mamdani at the beginning of this conversation. We're about to have an immigrant lead New York City. Like, for better or worse, America has allowed migration to redefine our institutions. I mean, your success, we haven't even talked about Oprah. Oh my gosh, like, you know, so we'll get to that. I know, it's amazing. So I'm asking you, and I'll bring this back around to you. Whereas a lot of other countries have not experienced that multiracial democracy and redefining of their institutions. So anyway, that's a long-winded response on migration, climate, and economy. Bringing that back around to you, so we're going to turn it over to you for questions. What was it like? Does Oprah Winfrey call you? Does it change your life? Does it change your book? Does it change what you do next? I mean, I'm asking like very kind of almost like fangirly questions. But I mean, it's Oprah Winfrey. I think we all want to know. What was that like? How did that happen?
It was a day in May, and my editor had set up a call with me, so she called me, and she said, oh, my phone is not really working. Let me call you back from a different phone. And I said, fine. I thought, you know, we would just have a conversation about some aspect of publishing the book. And so after 5 minutes, I got a call from an unknown number, and I picked up, and I said, hi, Jordan. And she said, were you expecting a call from Jordan? This is Oprah. I spent half of that call being incredibly confused about what was happening, because they really don't give you any indication. I thought for a while that somebody at my publisher had the manuscript and they were pulling my leg. But then she started, you know, she spoke about the book so beautifully, and I found it incredibly moving. She quoted lines that she liked. She asked me about plot points, and I thought, well, this is not a very funny joke. You know, we're kind of talking seriously about the book.
So you know it's not AI at that point because she's asking you about plot points, right?
Yes.
So this is real. Yeah.
This is very real. And so we had a really beautiful conversation, and I was at home, and I went out from the bedroom, I went into the living room where my husband and my son, they were coloring, and I said, I just got a call from Oprah. And it was nuts. It was completely nuts. And I feel like I'm still processing it all of these months later. I mean, you know, the beautiful thing, kind of coming back to what I was saying, is it is so hard to get attention for a book. So to have somebody like that lift up books, which she has done not only for this book, but so many other books this year. You know, she picked Ocean Vuong's novel, The Emperor of Gladness. I think she picked an older book by the author Richard Russo. And I saw Richard Russo's interview. He was expecting a call from Publishers Weekly, which is a publishing trade journal. And he spent the whole call thinking it was an interview with Publishers Weekly. And at the end, he said, oh, this was such a nice conversation. What was your name again? He was even more confused than I was. But she lifts up books all the time. There's a new book club pick right now, which is Anne Packer's novel called Some Bright Nowhere. And you've heard of the books in part because she lifted them up, right? And there are so many books being published. So I think I feel very grateful for this kind of lifting up of books and bringing them into public life.
It's incredible. All right, I'm turning it over to you. There's a microphone going around. If you could keep your question to a question and maybe tell us who you are, that would be great.
Hi. I just you had mentioned that there was a lady who was saying that you might not be able to get your visa, and I was wondering how did you get around that?
I'm glad it stuck with you because it was a horrifying moment in my life. There was nothing I could do. I stood before her at that window and she continued looking at my papers, and I guess she changed her mind. Because I think there's some kind of rule where you have to show that you have a certain amount of money in your bank account to get a visa, and I did not have that level of money. So it was a judgment call that she made. Other questions?
Hi, my name is Meghna, and I'm a short story writer, so I'm totally inspired by your work. So I'm curious, how do you sustain a long-term project like this? How do you stay motivated, and what inspires you to keep going on and doing this very, very lonely work?
Hi Meghna, thank you for taking some of your writing hours and coming here. I think you're right that the work of writing is motivated completely by you and your conviction that the thing you want to make is worth making. And if you don't make it, nobody else will. So that's one way in which I think about it, is that I write because there are questions that I want to ask. I write because I want to be lifted out of the banal questions of my day, like when do we have to do school pickup today, and what is for dinner, and who is getting the groceries. So you want a level of your life which is not about that, right? You want a level of your life where you are asking questions about love and morals, and think about the things that you really enjoy thinking about. You want to have an active life where you get to ask those questions. And there is something so beautiful about getting to ask those questions, about getting to have this inner, active, intellectual life, which means something to you. That's one way. And the other answer, which is very true, some people find it kind of dark. It's very true for me, is that, I have always been a person who is very aware of the end. Our inevitable shared end. We're not going to live forever. And so I think what being aware of that does for me is help me think, what am I doing with my time? What I do every day, that is what my life is. What do I want to do every day? I want to write.
Can I just ask the logistics of writing for you? Do you have a set time or schedule?
Now I have a 3-month-old, so
That answers that.
So now I am not writing. But if you had asked me 3 months ago with our older son, I would write when he went to preschool. And I should acknowledge, this is a very privileged thing to be able to say, is that I write instead of going to my job. For a long time, I had a day job. I worked in editorial at a small press called Catapult. And I used to write for 45 minutes in the morning before going to work. And I used to write on the weekends. And then I got, after publishing my first book, A Burning, I got a grant from this amazing foundation called the Whiting Foundation. Look them up, they support a lot of writers. It's a cool way to see, who are the new exciting writers. I got a grant from them, and it led me to ask for the first time, what can I do if I put my full brain and my full energy into writing rather than trying to squeeze it in when I'm tired. And I think it's just important to acknowledge the money aspect of it, because you have to work. You can't, yeah.
Absolutely. Other questions?
I have a question. Hi, my name is Lavanya. I'm from New Jersey, and I'm first generation U.S. raised. I come from a South Indian family, but growing up, my father exposed us to Bengali culture and arts. So I grew up with Tagore and Satyajit Ray. So my question for you is, how can the South Asian American diaspora in the U.S., which is so diverse, how can we get, maybe whether they're immigrants or they're U.S. raised, how do you think could be a good platform to get them exposed to some of the beauties of Bengali culture and literature? Because it's so rich. I feel every Indian should be exposed to it. It's enriched my life deeply.
That's a beautiful question. I will actually be in South India in January. I'll be in Chennai and then somewhere in Kerala, I'm forgetting where. My answer would be stories. Stories were how I came to this life. Tagore has beautiful children's stories. But of course, we were forced to read them in school, and I found them very annoying. And later, I think starting in my 20s, I started going back to them voluntarily with no exams in mind. And I started to understand how beautiful those stories are. And my answer would be stories, yeah.
Other questions?
Hi, sorry.
Where are we?
My name is Aurora. You said something earlier that you considered America a very troubled place, and I'm curious why. What do you see that?
Is this for me?
Oh
I think I did say it,
I thought
although
Megha said it. Either way.
I think we both alluded to America in a certain situation. I don't know if you want to take this. I'm happy to piggyback on whatever you said.
Let's do that. I think one answer is that this is a country which is very afraid of facing its history. It is incredibly afraid of facing the pain of its past. And as we can see, burying that kind of public, collective grief does not work. If you look at places like Rwanda, which there is no perfect country, but if you look at a place like Rwanda, which suffered a genocide in the early 1990s, the efforts that they made to heal as a country, I found remarkable. They had courts where people spoke to each other. They had kind of community courts where people were compelled to come to their neighbors who had harmed them and speak. And I think that kind of effort is very much lacking in this country. And I think that there is a great deal of confrontation and healing to be done.
My quick answer would be that my family experienced a profound amount of change within one generation. It is a miracle from when my parents came in 1971 to Jackson Heights, Queens, and Brooklyn. And then I kind of look to my daughters. I'm raising the third generation in the US, and I have great questions over whether, I never had a question over whether my life would be better than my parents'. I have great questions over whether my children's will be. Other questions? I just want to make sure we're getting over here with the microphones. Is there some, oh, there you are.
I think I'm Srini Mandavali. About the craft of writing, I'm curious, where we come from, we tend to invoke, be it religion or wildlife or things from back home. Are there tropes that you sort of avoid through the editing process? I'm curious if that's an issue in writing.
Do I read about?
Yeah, like when we find ourselves writing about certain themes, that might seem like, okay, you're invoking tropical themes or like the Royal Bengal tiger or what have you. How much of that is allowed and it's too much? I'm curious if that's...
He's saying, are there also tropes that you avoid as you're writing?
Thank you.
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
I never saw the word sandalwood soap, for example, anywhere in your works. Would that be an example? I cannot say
You
that.
know, you mentioned a tiger, and there is,
a tiger.
briefly a tiger in this book. I think the key thing is to recognize that the items and objects that we are familiar with perhaps get unfairly drawn into the realm of stereotype when they are used in kind of idle ways. So, you know, a tiger is a tiger, did not ask to be referred to, or, you know, mangoes. Delicious. Did not ask to be a stereotype of what people from South Asia should care about. But I think the key is in asking, why am I drawing this item into my story? What level of complexity am I allowing it? What am I letting it be truthfully in this story?
Other questions? We have time for, I think, like 2 more if we make them quick. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Megha. It was a wonderfully written book. I will get back to the story, and I think the story has resonated with me so much because I moved from India at a very mature age and have always worked here. I'm a physician and I've always worked in the south of Bronx. And the whole element of poverty, of the moral fight with oneself, and this fight about providing food, I see it every day in my patients that I take care of. And somehow, as I read the book, I started identifying myself with Ma. And I was wondering if, you know, just a part of leaving my child alone in the world, as I identified myself as Ma, did you think of other ways that could have ended the story? And this is just like a thought, like you don't have to. And I really respect the work that you have done. But what are other ways we could have ended the story?
I was trying not to go there, but
Okay, no spoilers, no spoilers. I'm very touched that you, as a physician with your physician's schedule and nutty workload, made the time to come here, so thank you.
Audiobooks.
You know the end, I will not give it away. The end was slightly different in the end, in the beginning, and my editor and I worked really hard to shift it a little bit and take it to a place where it felt like it would contain all the textures that I wanted it to contain. And of course, you know, I'm very curious about how each reader sits with the end. Of course, you might have, I mean, one of the beautiful things about writing a book is that people read it in different ways. So some people might feel, oh, this is inevitable. Some people might feel, oh, I'm really surprised by this. And I'm curious about what that reaction tells you about what you are bringing to the book.
I've been given the wrap-up signal. I want to give you the last word. I think you alluded to this with the ending question, but what do you want to leave this group with, whether it's your works or kind of the message? Climate and some of the morality we've talked about come to mind. And what do you need from this community? How can we best support you in this stage and next phase of whatever you're working on?
That is such a generous question. I think I feel so heartened to see a full room on a Saturday morning to talk about books.
You can give yourselves a round of applause. That's incredible. Truly incredible. I agree.
We need readers like you, you know. Keep an eye on what new books are coming out. Go to book events. buy books as gifts. Just keep being the readers that you are.
All right, on that note, there's a short break and then we'll resume at 11 a.m. Thank you all so much.